Subscribe to my YouTube channel for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the suburban street as David pulled into the familiar driveway. He sat in his car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, wondering if he was making the right choice. It had been 3 months since he'd last seen Marcus, his best friend since childhood, and the weight of their unresolved argument still pressed heavy on his chest. But today wasn't about pride or stubborn differences. Today was about forgiveness, about the brotherhood they'd built over 20 years of shared memories, scraped knees and whispered secrets in the dark. David had rehearsed his apology 100 times during the drive over, each word carefully chosen to mend the bridge that had crumbled between them. He walked up the stone pathway, past the rosebush that Elena had always tended with such care. The house looked exactly the same as it had when they were teenagers, when he'd spent countless afternoons here, when this place had felt like a second home. The memory of Elena's warm smile greeting him at the door, her gentle voice asking if he was hungry, if he needed anything, made his heart ache with nostalgia. David raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What if Marcus wasn't ready to forgive? What if the wounds were too deep? But before he could lose his nerve, he rapped firmly on the oak door, the sound echoing in the quiet afternoon. Footsteps approached from inside, quick and light. The door swung open and David's world tilted on its axis. Elena stood there, framed in the doorway like a vision that had stepped out of his most forbidden dreams. She wore nothing but an oversized white shirt that barely reached her mid-thigh, her dark hair tousled as if she'd just awakened from sleep. Her eyes widened in surprise, and color flooded her cheeks as she instinctively pulled the shirt down, though it did little to hide the graceful curves of her legs. "David," she breathed, her voice carrying a mixture of shock and something else he couldn't quite identify. I was expecting someone else." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made David's heart race. He stood frozen, drinking in the sight of her. This woman who had haunted his thoughts for years, who had been the subject of dreams he'd never dared to acknowledge even to himself. Elena was 42, but time had been impossibly kind to her. The laugh lines around her eyes only added to her beauty, and there was a depth in her gaze that spoke of wisdom and experience. She was everything David had ever found attractive in a woman, and everything he could never have. "I'm sorry," David managed, his voice rough. "I should have called first. I came to see Marcus to talk things through." Eleanor's expression shifted, a shadow of sadness crossing her features. "Marcus isn't here," she said softly. "He's been staying at his father's place since." She trailed off, wrapping her arms around herself. "Since what?" David asked, though something in his chest already knew the answer would change everything. Elena looked down at her bare feet, then back up at him with eyes that held an ocean of pain. "Since we separated. The divorce papers were finalized last week." The words hit David like a physical blow. Marcus had never mentioned any problems at home, but then again, they hadn't spoken in months. The realization that Elena was alone, that she was free, sent a surge of emotions through him that he fought to suppress. "I'm so sorry, Elena. I had no idea." She gave him a sad smile that broke his heart. "Not many people do. We've been trying to keep it quiet, especially for Marcus's sake. But..." She shrugged, and the gesture was so vulnerable, so achingly beautiful that David had to look away. "Who were you expecting?" he asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was none of his business, but the words had escaped before he could stop them. Elena's cheeks flushed deeper. "A friend. Someone who was supposed to help me move some furniture. But his plans changed. She paused, studying David's face. Would you like to come in? I was just about to make coffee. Every rational thought in David's mind screamed that he should leave, that he should get back in his car and drive away before he did something he'd regret. But his heart, the heart that had secretly loved this woman for years, wouldn't let him move. I'd like that, he said. Elena stepped aside, and as David passed through the doorway, he caught the faint scent of her perfume mixed with something uniquely her. It was intoxicating, and he had to steady himself against the wall. The house felt different now, emptier somehow. The family photos that had once lined the hallway were gone, leaving pale rectangles on the wallpaper. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft padding of Elena's bare feet on the hardwood floor. I'll just go put on some proper clothes, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to, David replied, then immediately felt heat flood his face. I mean, you're fine. Beautiful, I mean. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with his inability to form coherent sentences. Elena stopped and turned to face him fully. There was something in her eyes now, a recognition, an acknowledgement of the tension that had always existed between them, but had never been spoken aloud. David, she said, and the way she said his name was like a caress. Do you remember when you used to come here after school? When you and Marcus would do homework at the kitchen table? Every day, David said, his voice thick with memory. You'd make us sandwiches and ask about our day. I used to watch you sometimes, Elena admitted, colour rising in her cheeks. The way you'd concentrate so hard on your work. The way you'd laugh at Marcus's jokes. Even then, I thought you were special. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. David's heart hammered against his ribs as he processed her words, as he realized that perhaps his feelings hadn't been as one-sided as he'd always believed. Elena, he said, stepping closer. I need to tell you something. Something I should have said years ago. She looked up at him, her brown eyes wide and vulnerable. What is it? I've been in love with you since I was 17 years old, David said, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. I know it's wrong. I know it's complicated. But I can't pretend anymore. Not when you're looking at me like that. Not when you're standing here like this. Eleanor's breath caught, and for a moment, David thought he'd ruined everything. But then, she reached out and placed her hand on his chest, right over his racing heart. I know, she whispered. I've always known. The admission shattered what remained of David's self-control. He covered her hand with his, feeling the warmth of her skin through his shirt. Then why didn't you ever say anything? He asked. Tears gathered in Elena's eyes. Because I was married. Because you were my son's best friend. Because I was trying to be the woman I thought I was supposed to be. She took a shaky breath. But I'm not that woman anymore, David. I'm not sure I ever was. David cupped her face. In his hands, thumbs brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've spent 20 years trying to be happy in a marriage that was falling apart from the beginning. I'm saying that I've thought about you every single day since you stopped coming around. I'm saying that when I opened that door just now, for the first time in months, I felt alive again. The words were everything David had ever dreamed of hearing, but they came wrapped in the complexity of reality. Marcus was still his best friend, still Elena's son. The world would judge them, would whisper about the young man who stole his. Friend's mother, the older woman who seduced her son's friend. This is crazy, David said, though he made no move to step away from her. I know, Elena replied, her hands moving to rest on his shoulders. But I'm tired of being sensible. I'm tired of doing what everyone expects me to do. I'm tired of pretending that what I feel for you isn't real. David searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt, any indication that she might regret this moment later. But all he saw was honesty, raw and beautiful and terrifying. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no going back. Everything changes. Elena nodded, her gaze never leaving his. I know. But David, I've been living a lie for so long that I'd forgotten what the truth felt like. Until now. She rose on her tiptoes, and David met her halfway, their lips finding each other in a kiss that was 20 years in the making. It was soft and desperate, tender and passionate, filled with all the longing they'd both carried in silence. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Elena rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed. I've dreamed about this, she whispered, so many times. So have I, David admitted. Every night. They stood there in the hallway, holding each other, both knowing that they'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting golden light across their entwined forms. What happens now? David asked. Elena opened her eyes and looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. I don't know. But I know I can't go back to pretending. I can't go back to being the woman who settles for a life that doesn't fit. David nodded, understanding completely. He'd spent years watching Elena from afar, loving her silently, convincing himself that his feelings were wrong. But standing here now with her in his arms, everything felt right for the first time in his life. Marcus, David said, the name, heavy with complication. I know, Elena replied. He's going to be hurt, angry. He might never forgive either of us. Are you willing to risk that? David asked. Are you willing to risk everything? Elena was quiet for a long moment, and David could see the war playing out in her expression. The mother who wanted to protect her son, the woman who had spent years sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of others, the person who had finally found something real and beautiful and worth fighting for. I've spent my whole life being afraid, she said finally. Afraid of making mistakes, afraid of hurting people, afraid of wanting things I wasn't supposed to want. But I'm more afraid of spending the rest of my life wondering what if. David felt something shift inside him, a settling of his soul into a truth he'd carried for so long. Then we figure it out together, he said. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Elena smiled through her tears, and it was the most beautiful thing David had ever seen. Together, she agreed. They kissed again, slower this time, savoring the moment, the promise of what was to come. When they separated, Elena took his hand and led him toward the kitchen, toward the coffee she'd promised, toward the conversation that would reshape both their lives. As they sat across from each other at the kitchen table where they'd shared so many innocent moments years before, David realized that some loves are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. And as Elena reached across the table to take his hand, her eyes bright with possibility, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with the strength that comes from finding your other half. The afternoon sun continued its journey across the sky, painting the kitchen in warm golden hues, and two hearts that had beat in lonely rhythm for 20 years finally found their harmony. The story of David and Elena was just beginning, written in the language of second chances, and the courage to claim a love that had always been meant to be. Outside, the world continued its endless dance of ordinary days and ordinary people living ordinary lives. But inside the kitchen of the house on Maple Street, something extraordinary was being born from the ashes of everything that had come before. And for the first time in years, both David and Elena felt truly, completely alive. The future stretched before them, uncertain and complicated and beautiful. And they were ready to meet it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, finally free to love without apology or shame. The boy who had fallen in love with his best friend's mother had become a man willing to fight for that love, and the woman who had buried her dreams under years of duty and sacrifice had finally found the courage to reclaim them. Their story was just beginning, and it would be written in the language of hope, of second chances, of love that refuses to be denied. And as Elena squeezed David's hand and smiled through her tears, both knew that some things in life are worth the risk, worth the sacrifice, worth the fight. They were home, finally, in each other's arms, and the rest of the world could wait.